I'm Joe Bonifate from Arch Masonry and Restoration. Today we're going to build a corner or a lead. We're going to build it with 8-inch concrete block. We're going to rack it back. We're going to go about 6 or 7 courses high. Typically on our crew, if you're on a elevator shaft or a stairwell, we're just going to build 2 course leads. We don't have to pull the line very hard, so we spot 2, fill it in, put our wire down, strike the back, repeat. In today's example, I'm going to build a full lead. This is a scenario where we might have a lead man going out in front of the crew, building the corners, putting up leads as they come behind him, filling in the walls. We have chalk lines on the floor or pencil marks. So when we spread our mortar, we're going to be a little stingy with the mortar all the way to the edge so that it doesn't cover up all of our layout line. We're going to follow that with our eye and work to make the first course as plumb as possible. Don't just throw the block in position. Make your best effort to set them with your eye and hand as close to right as possible so that you have as little maneuvering of the block as possible. Typically, we like to see the whole course spread, lay the whole course, and then level, plumb, straight edge. In that order, level, plumb, straight edge. Before I do that, I'll show you the setup. You always start with a mortar board on the corner, sometimes stack jambs or corners so that they're handy for the corner. Then you have your wall stock. Typical setup, 6 stacks of block, and then another mud board, and so on and so forth to the other corner. But always start in all corners with a mud board and work your setup to the middle. Once you've laid all your block, level first, then plumb, then straight edge. You want to make sure your bubble is in the middle of the lines. And that your block is touching in all spots. This block is just a touch low right here. See what we look like. So we're not touching here. So although this bubble reads that this has to come down, I'm not even touching this point yet. So we're gonna tap down till we're where we want to be, and then we can come over here. Sometimes the first row is the most difficult, depending on how level the surface you're working on top of is. I prefer these types of levels that you can hit on them. And also, the location of the valve is important. When the valve is like this, concealed, you have to bend down in order to get a straight look at it. This type of level allows you to look directly at it without bending completely over. Makes for easier work. building a corner, plumb is the most important thing. Sometimes the block are not perfect and you cannot make it level and plumb. So you always make sure you're plumb because this is the guide for the rest of the wall. Your line is going to hang off of this corner, and how plumb and straight the corner is this way will determine the wall. Same thing with your tail, as we call it, the end of the lead. It's going to also determine the straightness of the wall. So in all circumstances, you want to hit your elevation, but plumb is the #1 thing you need to achieve. When you straight edge, you always want to straight edge the top. The bottom should be flush with your layout line or your last course of block. So straight edge the top. Now I put my straight edge on the top. I'm touching my plumb point here, but I'm not touching it here. Now this is my guide, I can't move it. What that means is this block needs to tilt back until this straight edge touches this block. Now I'm touching that point, I'm not touching this one now. Now I'm touching both points and I'm straight. Now in this case I'm not touching, but I don't really see my level line, my mark. I think this whole block needs to get tapped this way. Now we're ready to lay the next course. Always make sure in your inside corner that the mortar comes all the way into this point so that you don't have a hole in that corner later. When laying block, never put your trowel on the board. It makes an unnecessary step when you lay that block to turn around and grab your trowel. If you can't hold the trowel when you lay the block, such as this, there are other techniques to use, such as setting it on the wall or setting it on the block you're about to lay. You always lay the corner block first. And what you want to do is cut your mortar away so that you can see how it lines up, and you want to be able to sight this corner because the closer you get this corner to straight, it can be a guide as you set the other blocks. When laying block, you always want to squeeze the mortar. Don't push down and push the mortar away. Squeeze into it. You want a nice full joint all the time. See, with this trowel right here, I just grab it, cut my mortar so I can see what I'm doing, and continue working. I don't have to spin around to get to my trowel. I'm using this block to line up this block because I sighted the corner, so I think I'm close to plumb. So if I can then sight this block to this block, which is straight, and this block, which is close to plumb, I'm setting this block very close to where it needs to be. Now that I've laid on my block, I can level them. But before I level them, I should check my height. Typically, once you establish your first row, you can just go like this to keep it on 8-inch increments. I'm just a touch hair high to 8-inch. So I'll tap that down, which is what it looks like it needs to do. Again, the bottom should be lined up with the course beneath it. In a real job scenario, we would be putting wire in this course. You'll notice that when I spread the side of the wall closest to me, I turn the trowel. I don't turn my wrist. Many masons like to do this. The problem with turning your wrist is you can't spread so far to the next board. Whereas if you turn the trowel and not your wrist, you could reach in a much further direction and easily spread from board to board. Sometimes when laying against the corner or putting something like a head joint on the corner, hold it. It might want to move on you. Always clean your tails. Scoop this extra mortar up, put it on your board so you can use it. If you leave it sit there, it's going to get hard, it's going to be wasted. And then somebody else who comes to fill in has to chip it off. It's very important that your first course is correct, because as you move down the wall with your tail, you have a new plumb point every time. This plumb point always remains the same, but this plumb point steps in 8 inches with each course. Also, you may notice that for the most part, my work looks crisp and clean. That's because of how I cut the mortar. Holding the trowel like this instead of like this. If you cup the mortar, it collects here and you smear the wall. If you cut the mortar like this, it rolls away from the wall and collects on the trowel, keeping a cleaner appearance of your work. When spreading mortar for block, you're going to grab a trowel and give it a snap. Not like brick. Brick, you never snap the air out, but block, you snap the air out every time. Want to keep the mortar on your board in a nice neat pile in the middle. When it's spread out, it's going to get hard and crusty, not be good to work with. The first block I lay against the corner is coming into it this way. Gives it a little bit more time to get firm in position before I push against it in this direction. Pushing in it in this direction is where it's going to want to move on you. That's particularly important with a thinner block like a 6 or 4 inch. You're always watching here at your tail. You can see the center web and how it lines up with your head joint to make sure that you're holding bond correctly. You always want to be 8 inches here. That's half bond. 16-inch unit, half is 8. Now it's reading level, but I'm not touching here, so I know my middle is high. Now, it's hard to the line, which means it needs to come this way, but I'm touching the block completely and I have a little gap on this one. That means the block is plumb. It just needs to come this way a hair. Occasionally, it's good to check the height of your wall. I'll come around to show. Right there, we're a little high. You can see how thick that mortar joint is. You want to be careful. If you're pretty level, but just high, make sure you're hitting in the center and not on one of the ends. Don't hit on this face or this face, it will rock the block out of plumb. I know this was level, but in order to be plumb, I had to tap this down a little bit. That's okay. Plumb is more important than level in this situation. Sometimes when you get high and you can't see the corner, you gotta feel it with your hand on the outside edge. I can see this in here. It needs to come towards me. A lot of times, you don't even need to do this level of the last block because all that really matters is plumb. Now, one thing to do is to check your range. You just take your straight edge right along your tails. They should all be touching. We have one little bump